Tim Walz's record is a joke. He's been one of the most far-left radicals in the entire United States government at any level.
My opponent, Senator Vance, had a quote. He said that when they get power, and they will use the Project 2025, they need to be ruthless when it comes to the exercise of power.
Tonight, Tim Walz and J.D. Vance will face off for the vice presidential debate in New York. Now, this will be the only debate between the two and most likely the last this presidential cycle. Democrats have high hopes for Walz, hoping the Minnesota governor can continue the campaign's momentum after Kamala Harris's debate performance against Donald Trump. But J.D. Vance will certainly be a tough opponent. Trump's running mate is a strong debater and can use his skills to highlight Republicans' policies on the economy and immigration. Both Trump and Harris will be watching closely, looking for their VP nominees to seal the deal with voters and get through the evening without doing any harm to the campaigns.
I think JD is going to do great. He's a very smart guy. He's done a great job. People like him a lot.
We will cheer on Coach Walz when he debates J.D. Vance.
Now, we head into tonight's debate on the heels of a rough and tumble election as both sides battle it out over the state of inflation, border security, and foreign policy. Joining me now is the Hill's national political reporter, Cate Martel, to help break down what we can expect tonight as the two face off. So, Cate, we're seeing Senator Vance's team praise Governor Walz's debate skills, which seems like an interesting change in tone from their team. What do you make of that effort from their team?
Yeah, that is kind of a funny strategy, Bianca, and it's all about these mind games. It's reverse psychology, because why not raise the bar for expectations for Tim Walz to have a successful night? We actually saw a Trump campaign advisor, Jason Miller, on CNN, where he's mentioned that Tim Walz has been in politics for nearly 20 years, that he is a pretty good debater, and, you should set the bar pretty high. And I think what's actually pretty interesting, too, is that Senator J.D. Vance, in a call with the Teamsters earlier, said that he actually hasn't prepared for this debate much. He said if you know the policy, you don't really have to prepare. So I'm interested to see how effective a strategy is that. You can know the policy all you want, but there are certainly debate strategies and tactics, and I'll be interested to see how much this actually translates into tonight versus knowing the policy in and out versus being prepared in a debate setting.
Yeah, and what it really means to not really prepare much will be interesting. But we're also seeing, on the other hand, other Walz allies like Senator Amy Klobuchar slightly lowering expectations. What do you make of that approach? Is it a similar thing, mind games?
Mind games, why not lower the bar? If you're a Democrat, why set these major expectations that he may not be able to fulfill? Now, regardless of how this goes, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz will have an army of surrogates, including Senator Klobuchar, in the spin room to defend him. And, we've seen almost some nerves, I think, from Tim Walz over this debate, that, he has said himself that Senator J.D. Vance is a Yale law guy while I'm a public school teacher. This does show me that this is not as familiar territory when, Senator J.D. Vance knows how to do this. This is very much within his wheelhouse. And I think that's why we're seeing him Democrats try to lower expectations to see how we come out of tonight. But also at the very end of the day, compare this to the Trump-Harris debate, and it didn't necessarily move the needle. So it'll be interesting to see how much effect does this debate have, because it is the only VP debate and possibly the last debate before the election.
Yeah, that's a good point. And like you said, both sides are going to come out saying our candidate won the debate. But in the end, what do Walz and Vance need to do in order to really sway those very few undecided voters out there?
Very few undecided voters, I think, is exactly it, Bianca. And what's interesting is they actually have very competing, contrasting goals tonight. For Tim Walz is this, dad next door, very friendly, relatable guy. That has been how he has been pitched by the campaign. He's had a fairly successful rollout. So what he needs to show is that in addition to being this relatable guy, he can also potentially be the commander-in-chief. Can he go deep on policies, and how can he defend himself? I expect we'll be hearing about his military record, and we'll probably be hearing more about his policies. I know that Senator J.D. Vance's strategy is to make him look too liberal. Now, on the reverse, while Walz's goal is to try to look serious, I think Senator J.D. Vance needs to do the exact opposite. He needs to look less serious. His campaign rollout has been fairly rocky. We keep hearing time and time again about this infamous childless cat lady comment, and the clip that went around a few weeks ago of him in a donut shop ordering donuts, and he was fairly awkward about it, and people were mocking him by saying he looks robotic. So this is his opportunity to look relatable, friendly, a guy that you trust and potentially, want to grab a drink with. So I think he's going to try to show how much of a human he is and how relatable he is. So it's fascinating, I think, to watch both dynamics at play. Like we said earlier, these debates, historically haven't, moved the dial much because they are not the top of the ticket. But I actually think this could be a very different case in this debate because it is the only one and because this has been a fairly condensed campaign season, Bianca.
Yeah, and the race is so tight. It feels like anything could sort of move the needle at this point, including a vice presidential debate, which, like you said, typically doesn't move the needle that much. But for the first time, I think, in history, we're going to get a play-by-play by one of the presidential candidates. President Trump is going to do a play-by-play on Truth Social, his social media website. What do you think we can expect from that?
I think it'll be an extremely active night.
I agree.
Yes, he announced he's doing this personal play-by-play, but had he not announced it, we all would have been looking at Truth Social, right, and been wondering what is he going to be tweeting. Sure. Because since the last debate, former President Trump didn't have the most successful night. That, most calculations were it was a fairly weak debate for him, and Harris did fairly well. So I think this is on some level his redemption tour. He's going to want to chime in. But also at the very same degree, we know former President Trump, he wants to be part of the spotlight. That, he's going to have to be careful here because this is the one night to let his running mate shine. So he has to be careful not to outshine him and not to necessarily say something controversial that will make it to all these takeaway pieces that we'll be reading tomorrow morning. I think that the Trump Vance campaign is going to want to keep it all to the debate, but I don't think Trump can resist. I'm going to be fascinated to see what he tweets tonight. When he was announcing earlier that he will be doing this personal play-by-play, he referred to Tim Walz's Tampon Tim, which is referring to a policy that Governor Walz put into place to provide feminine hygiene products to schools. I wouldn't be surprised if we see that nickname come up in a sarcastic tone again. And I think we're going to be seeing a fairly active night, right?
I think it's going to be a very active night on social media. Easy prediction to make. But there's also another unique thing happening during this vice presidential debate. CBS, which is hosting, is not going to have muted mic, so it might look a little different than the ABC debate for the presidential candidates. But they're also going to provide a QR code for viewers when it comes to fact-checking. So how is that going to work?
Yeah, isn't it a pretty interesting option? There's this age-old question of should debate moderators get involved and should they be fact-checking? And we saw the first debate when President Biden was still at the top of the ticket that the CNN moderators chose not to fact-check, and they were criticized. Then when we had the debate between Trump and Harris, the ABC moderators did fact-check, and they were also criticized. So it's hard to find.
Yeah, you can't win.
Yeah, you can't win. So CBS News has this creative solution, this third option, and instead they're going to display a QR code prominently on TV for extended periods of time with a scannable code where people can go to the CBS News website and there will be a team of roughly 20 reporters live fact-checking. It's going to be, I think, interesting way to go about it. But I think ultimately, yes, that's a way to fact-check, but that's not the same as having debate moderators fact-check. When debate moderators get involved, that does steer the conversation. Mm-hmm. Also, you think of a lot of older voters or people who are not as tech savvy to be able to figure out how the QR code works.
Or if they just don't have access to that sort of technology, how would they be able to follow along?
Absolutely. So, it is certainly an effort for CBS News to try to find this creative middle ground, but I think we're going to err closer to the CNN debate of not having fact-checking than actually more of the ABC strategy of fact-checking when they see fit.
I cannot imagine preparing for that sort of event, so my thoughts are with the team of fact-checkers on CBS's team. I do want to switch gears here a little bit, though. Hurricane Helene, the death toll from the storm is up. Sadly, people are still missing. What do we know about how the federal government and the White House is responding? What are they doing right now?
Yeah, so FEMA is very much involved in the relief and recovery efforts in this devastating situation. Now, President Biden today is having an emergency briefing on the efforts. And we also saw Vice President Harris yesterday at the FEMA headquarters receiving a briefing. President Biden is saying that later this week he will be visiting North Carolina to assess the damage. So as far as like optics go, that's what we've been seeing from the Biden-Harris administration. Now, what's going to be, I think, happening more materially is funding. That's the key here, that we've seen estimates that the damage might be upwards of $160 billion to be able to fix. We saw some of these towns completely obliterated and are going to have a lot of rebuilding efforts and to be able to get supplies to people in the affected areas. So President Biden did float potentially asking Congress to come back during their 6-week-long recess, pull them off the campaign trail very briefly to pass some supplemental funding. It's unclear, what is going to be necessary because the situation, like I said, is very much evolving, but we have seen the administration try to be as active and as involved as possible. While President Biden was in Delaware over the weekend, he was very much in close contact with local officials on the ground to see what the administration can do.
Yeah, I mean, you look at some of the images and it just feels impossible guessing how long it might take to reconstruct some of these towns. Like you said, we're totally wiped out. And we know what the White House is doing. President Trump went to Georgia yesterday. And Governor Brian Kemp is praising the Biden administration's response that you just talked about to Hurricane Helene. And I'm wondering if you think this storm could be a political football of sorts. It's sort of making me think of Superstorm Sandy in 2012 when President Obama hugged New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. A lot of Republicans were very mad about that. Could this storm have any effect on the election?
I actually think it could. We're talking about key battleground states here, Georgia and North Carolina, and to a lesser degree, but also Florida, that are critical areas that have been affected by the storm. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned former President Trump did visit Georgia yesterday. He's in a tougher spot. There is an advantage to being the incumbent administration by President Biden and Vice President Harris having an active role in the recovery. This is in their official duties as president and vice president, which makes them look presidential and can show their leadership ability and their empathy. Former President Trump doesn't have official roles, so by him visiting inherently looks more political. That's kind of put him in a tougher spot, and by him accusing President Biden of not working with Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, which later we found out, yes, they actually had been in contact, that was not a false claim by former President Trump, added this whole political aspect to it. So it's much easier to be on the inside than it is to be on the outside. And Trump's in a tough spot. He has to really balance, not trying to anger people. And like you mentioned, this does remind me a lot of 2012 with Superstorm Sandy, when you saw, famously former President Obama shook hands with then Republican governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie. So, I think it's going to also be important to see over the next few weeks, how does FEMA's response play out? That if they can handle this effectively, which to Georgia Governor Brian Kemp's credit, has said this has been handled well so far. If that can be played out, that could potentially help Democrats. But if they botch this recovery period and relief, you can start comparing things to 2006 with Hurricane Katrina. So they're at a delicate time, and it sure adds pressure to FEMA's response.
Yeah, a lot of pressure. Cate Martel, national political reporter at The Hill. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bianca.
Members of the International Longshoremen's Association are on the picket lines after walking off the job at midnight. Now half of all shipping cargo coming in and out of the U.S. could be dead in the water, which would cripple the economy. News Nation's Alina Shirazi is tracking the story from the Port of Baltimore.
Here at the Baltimore Port, I got to speak with the workers that you can see over my left shoulder. They have been here overnight through midnight, working through the rain. They tell me earlier, they say they're going to be here working through these tough conditions through the morning and into the night. We have a statement here from the International Longshoremen Association. They say, quote, ILA longshore workers deserve to be compensated for the important work they do, keeping American commerce moving and growing. We know the Baltimore Port here alone, where I'm at this morning, leads the country in car shipments. So the impact of a strike, we know, would be huge. But take a look at the ports impacted here, as far north as Boston, all the way down to the East Coast in Florida, across the south to Alabama, New Orleans, and Houston, Texas. But why does this matter to our viewers at home? We know Americans could soon feel the impacts on their wallets with the nation's supply chain stopping in its tracks, leading, as I mentioned, to higher prices for consumers as well as long delays for deliveries. All of this happening, of course, before the holiday season. We know port workers driving home the point that they need more money as well as job security. So hear from one now.
Social Security, we have to look out for our health care. It's a lot to those automation things.
And pro-union President Biden says he would not intervene in these negotiations. For now, he says he would let them move forward. But as for how much this would cost the U.S. economy, reports say it could cost up to $4 billion. And I'm talking each day. In Baltimore, Alina Shirazi, News Nation.
News Nation's Alina Shirazi, thank you. This week, we're looking at the key issues in the battleground states that will likely determine the election in November. In the swing state of Pennsylvania, fracking, the process of extracting oil and natural gas from underground formations, has become a major campaign issue. Dennis Owens is the veteran political reporter at Next Our Nation's WHTM in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and he has a look at just how much this issue could impact the election in the Keystone State.
The very first oil well was drilled here in Pennsylvania in 1859, but in this battleground state, it's the natural gas coming out of the ground that has become the focal point of the presidential race.
Not true.
And probably
there's been lots of he said.
She will never allow fracking in Pennsylvania. If she won the election, fracking in Pennsylvania will end on day one.
She said.
Let's talk about fracking because we're here in Pennsylvania. I made that very clear in 2020. I will not ban fracking. I have not banned fracking as Vice President of the United States.
The candidates are debating over Vice President Kamala Harris now supporting hydraulic fracturing, known as fracking, which blasts water, sand, and chemicals into rock formations to release underground natural gas. Harris previously opposed it. Pennsylvania is second only to Texas in the amount of gas it produces, first in the amount it exports.
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
The focus of attack ads flooding PA airwaves? Fracking.
We're celebrating the 20th anniversary of the first Marcellus well. In 2004,
drill, baby, drill. They stole your auto industry.
It's a great reserve, among the richest reserves in the whole country, if not the world.
Dave Callahan is president of the Marcellus Shale Coalition, a natural gas trade group.
The industry in 2022 was responsible for upwards of $41 billion in economic activity. That's a significant amount. We supported 123,000 jobs, paying on average $97,000 a year.
Critics say those industry numbers are inflated, but there's no question landowners have gotten royalty checks, state coffers have collected impact fees, and powering PA is cheaper for everybody.
If you use gas at your home or your business, one of the reasons it's a lot less expensive now than it was before is because of fracking in Pennsylvania.
Those who tasted what came out of the tap said it was foul.
Not to say fracking is free. There are environmental concerns. Neighboring New York banned it in 2014, but not so Pennsylvania, perhaps because where most of the gas is in PA is where most of the population isn't. It makes environmentalists uncomfortable, but for 2 decades, drill, baby, drill has been the state's unofficial motto.
Democrats support an all-the-above energy strategy. Doing an exclusive fracking play here in Pennsylvania, I think misses the mark on what Pennsylvanians care about, and certainly misses the mark nationally. I would be shocked if it's mid-November and we're saying that fracking won or lost this election for either candidate.
Republicans would be shocked if it didn't.
I'll make a bold prediction here. I think more people will vote on energy than they will on abortion in the presidential race.
Despite the claims in the ads, presidents cannot ban fracking on private land, but they can add restrictions and regulations that hinder production and transportation of the gas.
That can be a de facto ban. So it's very important not just to pay attention to the slogans, but to pay attention to the policies that underlie those slogans.
Democrats and Republicans can debate how big a deal fracking is to Pennsylvania voters. What's not debatable, based on the millions of dollars of ads they're spending, the candidates certainly think it is. In Harrisburg, I'm Dennis Owens.
Dennis Owens with Next Our Nation's WHTM in Harrisburg. Thanks so much. Baseball legend Pete Rose has passed away at the age of 83. A spokesperson for Clark County in Nevada confirmed on behalf of the medical examiner that Rose died Monday, though the cause of death has not yet been determined. Rose was a 17-time All-Star and played in 3 World Series, holding the Major League record for games played and the National League record for longest hitting streak. The longtime Cincinnati Reds' historic career was undermined when Major League Baseball banished Rose with a lifetime ban in 1989 for gambling, halting any chance the fallen idol had at entering the Hall of Fame. The MLB issued a statement saying it extends its deepest condolences to his family, friends, and fans. But many people are criticizing that statement and coming to Rose's defense. Even former President Trump wrote on Truth Social, quote, "Major League Baseball should have allowed him into the Hall of Fame many years ago. Do it now before his funeral." And former President Jimmy Carter is the first former commander-in-chief to turn 100 years old. Carter reached the milestone Tuesday. The nonprofit Carter Center released a statement celebrating the former president, saying, "President Carter's legacy continues to inspire hope and progress worldwide. His century of life is a testament to the power of service, and the Carter Center stands as an enduring reminder of his commitment to peace, health, and human rights." That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Briana Facchinei. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.